Hi, thanks for joining us tonight. We've got Catherine Brown, who is the director of the Institute of Alcohol Studies, who's presenting the Sober Easters webinar tonight. And her presentation is called Women's Drinking and Social Norms. Institute of Alcohol Studies is a charity that aims to sort of educate the public on issues, public policy issues around alcohol. And I met Catherine in April of this year at a conference in Dublin on women, girls and alcohol, and was really inspired by her speech there, which was fantastic. So I'm really pleased that Catherine's agreed to present this tonight, and I hope you find it informative and helpful. I'm sure you will. So I'll hand you over to Catherine now. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucy, and thank you everybody for this opportunity to speak to you today. I'm really delighted to be joining the Sober Easters network this evening. This is a network that I've admired for a very long time, and I certainly find Lucy an inspirational speaker. I've enjoyed hearing her speak and tell her story at all of the events that we've met at since April. And I think that this network really does offer hope for how women can help lift each other out of times of darkness in life, and I'm really delighted to be speaking to you all this evening. So a bit more about me and my organisation. So as Lucy said, I'm the director of a charity called the Institute of Alcohol Studies. So we're an independent organisation in that we don't rely on funding from either the government or the drinks industry, which means that we get to have an independent voice when it comes to talking about alcohol policy to government. So our aim is to bridge the gap between science and public policy. So we work to make information about the scientific evidence on alcohol accessible to government and decision makers and the media. And this is all in the hope that more effective alcohol policies will be rolled out that can reduce rates of harm in society from excessive drinking. So this evening I'd like to run through a brief overview of the history of women's drinking and outline some of the key drivers behind cultural changes to female alcohol consumption. I'd then like to look at how today's culture deals with the negative consequences associated with women and alcohol, and offer some suggested steps that can be taken in order to shift our culture towards a less harmful approach to drinking. So first of all, how did we get here? How did we go from drinking sober cups of tea to slamming tequilas at the bar? So historically, if we go back in time, more than 100 years ago, women's drinking was deemed culturally unacceptable in general. So female drunkenness was often associated with poverty and with destitution and negative connotations. However, the issue of alcohol control actually became an important stepping stone for women to exert their political influence in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And women actually played an important role in the temperance movement, which was one of the largest social movements ever seen. Now, the lady picture here is Lady Rosalind Howard. She was known as the Radical Countess, and she was one of the most prominent female figures in the temperance movement. Now, she was called the Radical Countess due to her strong views on teetotalism, which led her to closing down pubs, public houses, on her extensive family estate and requiring that their tenants remain teetotal. Now, Rosalind Howard, like many temperance activists, saw alcoholism as a consequence of wider social problems as opposed to the failings of the individual. So we're already seeing this moving away to alcohol being a problem of the weak and the destitute, to it being seen as a wider social problem, there being more structural issues at play here. Now, women in the temperance movement actually exerted quite a lot of influence over men's drinking behaviour, which was framed as unproductive in terms of spent earnings and as well as the cause of many social ills. Now, I think it's interesting to see how women united on this issue and campaigned in such a fierce way. Many female temperance activists were also very heavily involved in the women's suffrage movement, so teetotalism was actually linked to female empowerment. Now, to have women be so public in their campaigning activities at a time when they didn't actually have the vote, I think just goes to show what a strong issue teetotalism was, and also how powerful the temperance movement was in its day. Now, if we move forward from the turn of the 20th century and go to the post-Second World War era, we can see this trend around attitudes to women's drinking had a major shift. Now, it suddenly became a lot more acceptable for women to drink. This could have been because of greater levels of female participation in the workplace. So this allowed more social acceptability for women to be seen in public and to be drinking in public. It also meant that increased disposable income meant that women could be more likely to enter pubs and to spend money in pubs and socialise in traditionally male domains. Now, the first ever alcoholic drink designed for women was produced in 1953. As you can see here, an advert for the lovely Babycham became quite a popular feminine choice. However, in spite of the greater acceptability for women to consume alcohol, public drunkenness still remained rare and unacceptable. And indeed, some commentators have argued that the increased female presence in pubs led to less public drunkenness amongst men, because women were able to act as social controls and keep their men in line, i.e. give the other half a bit of an elbow in the side if he'd had one too many. And then if we jump forward to the 1990s, when women were seen to begin to drink as much, if not more, as men, and display an equal level of public drunken behaviour. Now, society's response to this apparent newfound gender equality in terms of alcohol consumption was largely negative, and women who drank like men were given quite disparaging, in my opinion, names such as ladettes and geezer birds. And there was increasing media attention on alcohol-fueled domestic disorder and alcohol-fueled female crime. Now, moving forward to the 21st century, female drinking appeared to become more feminine and more glamorous, with the advent of the iconic Sex and the City characters, for example. And professional statistics showed that professional women in high-powered jobs became the largest cohort of female drinkers out of all women. And rather be framed as girls drinking like men, it appeared that women had actually carved out their own drinking culture and identity. Now, media reports depicted women, working women struggling to balance life at home with children and a busy job, and then they would turn into alcohol to self-medicate and aid their stress. And it suddenly became increasingly socially acceptable for mummies to refer to wine o'clock when they put the children to bed. So this was very much a shift in the acceptability of women and the normalisation of women's drinking to cope with 21st century life. So if we look back to these shift in history and this shift in culture of women's drinking, we can question why. What's led to this culture change? Now, many commentators have attributed the increase in women's drinking to a number of changes experienced by women and their role in society. So increased participation in the workplace, which leads to increased disposable income. The fact that the kinds of employment that women tend to occupy are referred to as wet environments, so employments that traditionally drink a lot, such as the media, journalism, hospitality and entertainment. And there's also the argument that with gender equality, it just means that women are allowed in society's view to share male spaces, which includes drinking in public. However, whilst all of these arguments all have merit, I personally find the conclusion that women have essentially used their newfound freedom to go and get drunk a bit uncomfortable. And to me, it seems to imply that women are the weaker sex in terms of self-control and resisting harmful behaviour. Now, I would argue that there are actually far bigger structural drivers behind the shifting consumption trends amongst women and indeed society at large. So if we look at the international... Thank you, Lucy. Sorry about that. Technology always fails us. So I think where I was cut off was talking about why have women changed their drinking culture in the last 100 or so years, and what has been the big drivers for these cultural change. And I think I might have ended by saying I don't think that it's actually fair to say that it's all to do with gender equality and the fact that women are now occupying men's spaces in society, taking on, you know, male roles, and that it's okay for us to go to the pub because we're all equal. I would actually say that whilst these arguments have merit, that they might have something, this might be a factor in why women are drinking more because of gender equality. But I actually think that the conclusion that we've actually, us as women, have used our newfound freedom to go and get drunk is a bit uncomfortable. I think this implies that we might be the weaker sex in terms of self-control and resisting harmful behaviour. Now, I would argue that there are actually bigger structural drivers behind the shifting consumption trends and culture amongst women drinking, and indeed society at large. So I'd like to now touch on the international evidence base, which suggests that the three key drivers for alcohol consumption are how affordable it is, how easy it is to access, and how heavily it is promoted and marketed. Now, when all these three factors come together, they essentially create what's called an alcoholic environment, which is really about increasing the probability of heavy consumption throughout the population. And with this increased probability of heavy consumption, there's an even greater chance that there's going to be very harmful and damaging consumption within the population. So I'd like to focus the next part of my presentation on the role that marketing, so the third driver, has played in increasing consumption of alcohol amongst women. Now, if we look at all consumer goods industries, we can see that they've actually had a very significant impact on population behaviour and culture, with instant gratification and ever-increasing wants and desires underpinning the aims and objectives of pretty much all advertising campaigns. You know, you only have to turn on your television at the moment and all the Christmas adverts are out saying that, you know, we want this now, we need this, life will only be good if we have this product, whatever it is. So I think we can all relate to that. Now, if we look at the changing nature of the alcohol industry in recent decades, we can actually see that this change has had a huge impact on the industry's marketing practices. Now, if we roll back, many alcohol products were traditionally produced on quite a small scale at a local level, with every region, sometimes every town, having its local tipple. However, after a series of major mergers, the alcohol industry is actually now dominated by just 12 major producers, promoting global brands that are easy to market on quite a large scale across the world. In fact, some of you may have seen the news in the last 2 weeks that two of the world's biggest breweries, SAB Miller and AB InBev, have agreed to merge. And this means that 1/3 of the world's beer is now going to be owned by one major multinational corporation. So this is really big business. So alcohol itself as a product is what's known as a fast-moving consumer good. A fast-moving consumer good can be anything from cereal to soap powder. And because of that, the marketing methods used to advertise and market and promote alcohol are the same that are applied to soap powder or breakfast cereal. So this means that the alcohol industry will focus on marketing all of its products in 4 main ways. And this is following the 4 what's called the magic P's in the marketing industry. And that is, they will look at the product itself, they will look at the price of that product, they'll look at the place at which it's sold, and they'll look at traditional promotion and advertising of that product. So if we look at how the alcohol industry have adapted products to target women in recent decades, we can see that many alcohol companies have developed new products specifically designed to attract women customers. So press statements from some leading alcohol producers have highlighted how women are seen to be a really important target market for them, and one that must be enticed through the development of new products. So I've got a press statement here from SAB Miller. Now, Sue Clark, their managing director, recently said in an interview that people have grown up on Pepsi and Coke, so the younger generation have a much sweeter palate, and we are playing to that. There has been a huge focus around flavoured beers, and we are developing products around apple and citrus. So these drinks are clearly being targeted, these products are being amended and targeted at female and younger audiences, and they're openly admitting this. So in terms of packaging of this product as well, SAB Miller recently produced a 250 millilitre, so a smaller cone-shaped piccola bottle, and this was designed to be more appealing to women than the female market. So again, the same person, Sue Clark, SAB Miller's managing director, said, the piccola bottle is much more delicate and feels more feminine. A smaller bottle is what we hear women want. They don't like the bloating that comes from drinking large quantities. Women prefer to sip over a longer period, while men prefer to chug. So here we're seeing specific products openly being targeted to entice more women drinkers. And I've just got on this slide here some examples of others, but it's not just SAB Miller, it's all major alcohol companies are specifically tailoring products to meet a female audience. There's an awful lot of pink involved. They're often sweeter. They can be low calorie. You know, Lambrini Lucy is only 29 calories per serving. And they're often associated with fruits and all things that are seen as traditionally feminine. So I find it really interesting to compare this to some very obviously designed female cigarettes. So we know that tobacco companies saw women as a very important target market for them post-war. So there was the design of the Virginia Slim that was used to appeal to appetite suppression and elegance. And there's also even more recently quite attractive feminine style packaging around cigarettes that emulate perfume boxes. And there's been an awful lot of controversy around the use of packaging to entice younger girls with the idea of glamour. What a surprise, that's what these cigarettes are called. With the introduction of plain packaging in many countries, included in the UK, soon to come. So this is just an example of how the alcohol industry have really used its product to provide its to target female market. So moving on to the second P, price is actually possibly the most important of the four Ps when it comes to consumption behaviour. It's certainly the biggest driver of consumer behaviour when it comes to alcohol. Now, in the UK, the real price of alcohol has fallen significantly in the last 20-30 years, and alcohol is currently 60% more affordable today than it was in 1980. So this means that it's more affordable in terms of real income and inflation than it was 30 years ago. Now, cheap drink offers in supermarkets are very common. We see the stack 'em high, sell 'em cheap policy rolled out, especially at this time of year and Christmas. And in fact, alcohol has in the past been used as a loss leader, which means that supermarket will sell it at below cost, so less than the price that they pay for it, in order to draw in customers in the hope that their customers will spend more in the shops on other groceries. So to give you an example, we've been doing some work with police officers in recent months, and some of the comments we received back from the police officers was, we know when Lambrini's on offer in Tesco's because we see the bottles in the street on a Saturday evening when they go out and deal with all the women that have been drinking at home and preloading before a Saturday night out. So we know that price has been a real method for the alcohol industry to attract more custom. So if we then go on to the third P, which is the place at which it's sold, Now, we could say that alcohol has become enormously more available in the UK. The deregulation of the licensing law meant that there was a real marked increase in the number of outlets were permitted to sell alcohol, mostly off licenses, meaning shops and supermarkets as opposed to pubs. In fact, since the introduction of the 2003 24-hour Licensing Act, for every one on-trade licence granted, i.e. for every new pub, bar or restaurant alcohol licence, there have been 78 new off-licences granted, i.e. there have been 78 shops or supermarkets permitted to sell alcohol. Now, we can see today a real ubiquity of alcohol availability. It's marketed and sold at hairdressers, at supermarkets, at book clubs, almost every occasion associated with drinking, with many schools applying for alcohol licenses for PTA events, etc. So we can see a real growing in the place and the availability of alcohol in recent years. Now, if we move on to the final P, which is the promotion, we can see that in recent years, alcohol advertising has been heavily targeted at women and girls, really aligning with female identity. We see alcohol advertisements associated with social mobility, with success, with humour, with mocking men, with girls' nights out, with girls' nights in. And alcohol companies frequently sponsor female entertainment, so TV shows and events such as Ladies' Day at the races, Desperate Housewives. And we've even seen cases of sponsorship deals with cosmetic brands typically associated with quite younger teenage girls. So if we look at some of the examples here on this slide, we can see how all of these adverts really are targeted towards the females market. There's, no middle-aged man is going to be paying attention to these adverts, except maybe the very attractive women in Desperate Housewives. But essentially we're seeing, there's an awful lot of very heavily targeted female messaging within these advertisements. Perhaps one of my favourite alcohol promotion of this year was this Japanese advert for a beer which will make us look younger because it contains collagen. So I'm looking forward to that one hitting the female market. So these were all really just examples of how the alcohol industry has really targeted female consumers to encourage them to buy more of their products and therefore to drink more. So we've talked about what the alcohol industry's role has been in all of this. But for the next part of my presentation, I'd really like to discuss how contemporary culture deals with the issue of harmful drinking amongst women, and whether there is a balance between the positive promotions of alcohol as a normal female behaviour that we're seeing from the alcohol industry promotions, and the negative health and social consequences associated with female drinking. So perhaps one of the greatest health concerns amongst women today is breast cancer. So it's widely accepted that alcohol consumption increases a woman's risk of developing breast cancer, and that this risk increases the more women drink. Indeed, recently the European Cancer Leagues and the World Health Organization both issued advice to say that for cancer prevention there is no safe level of alcohol consumption. However, aside from a real handful of public information initiatives, there's been very little attention awarded to this issue by the media or from government, and public awareness about the link between alcohol and breast cancer is really low. So the Alcohol Health Alliance UK, which is a coalition of charities and medical organisations, they recently conducted a public opinion poll which showed that more than 2/3 of people were unaware of the link between alcohol and breast cancer. Now, in the face of this evidence, conversely, alcohol promotions are often linked to breast cancer in order to appeal to a high-profile female issue. So this is often called pinkwashing, and this is when marketing professionals use the issue of breast cancer as a means of increasing their brand awareness and favourability amongst women. Now, I would argue that given that there are very clear risks associated with alcohol and cancer, including breast cancer, that these promotions actually present a major conflict of interest between promoting women's health and indeed risking it. And similarly, an important point to note is what organisations are offering women information about the health risks associated with their drinking. Now, there's been an emergence of alcohol industry funded bodies acting as NGOs. They're often called social aspects organisations. And the UK's DrinkAware claims to be the leading independent alcohol awareness charity, yet DrinkAware is solely funded by the drinks industry. Now, DrinkAware has been criticised in the past for compounding the normalisation of drinking in society, and these tweets that I'm presenting to you now appear to support these accusations because they show seemingly that DrinkAware are more interested in promoting drinking and the normalisation of excessive drinking and hangovers by, giving people tips for a hangover on a Saturday morning, or identifying where people could go and drink in the summer when the sun's out. Now, perhaps more prominent in the social mindset around the harms associated with women's drinking are the acute harms associated with female consumption. Now, this is particularly amongst young women in terms of sexual assault and rape. However, again, it would appear that a tension exists between the normalisation and the social acceptability of excessive female consumption and the victim blaming culture that exists when things go wrong as a consequence of women's drinking. So what's deemed culturally acceptable for the majority of the population, as shown by advertising and promotion, suddenly becomes a problem for the individual woman who needs to control her drinking in order to protect herself from harm. Now, I would argue that rather than focus on individual behaviours, we need to look at the large structural drivers of consumption if we're really going to be serious about tackling alcohol harm, such as sexual assaults, rapes and domestic abuse. So how do we deal with all of this? How do we shift this current culture that seems to be balancing so many tensions of, on the one hand, normalising and glamorising women's drinking and saying it's completely okay, but on the other hand, the rise in health consequences, the greater health risks such as cancer and breast cancer, the misinformation given to women, and in fact the demonisation of women and having them blamed, in a sense, for the consequences of when things go wrong because they've drunk too much. Now, I think if we're going to shift this culture and push it into a brighter direction for the future for our girls, for the next generation, we need to, first of all, accept that there are structural drivers of drinking, and these structural drivers include the affordability, the availability and the promotion of alcohol, and that it's not just a natural shift in culture. This pattern of drinking behaviour didn't just happen by accident overnight. There were some very large players, or large puppet masters, so to speak, driving this change. I think we really need to look to the evidence base of what is going to work. What do we know will reduce harm at the population level? And the evidence base is very clear. It says if you regulate price, if you regulate the availability, and you regulate the marketing of alcohol, things will get better. And I think thirdly, we really need to look at rebalancing the positive promotional messages with public health information. So, for example, I think that consumers have a right to know that alcohol, like tobacco, causes cancer. And I think we need to see more honest information given to consumers so that they can make informed decisions about their drinking. And I think certainly we need to see more of this information to counterbalance just how many positive advertising messages we're bombarded with across society every day. So I think I'm going to end there, but I hope that this presentation has been informative and interesting, and I really want to spend the rest of the time taking questions if there are anybody, if anybody's managed to put up with my sniffling through this presentation. But I hope that this has sparked some debate, and I really look forward to hearing thoughts on this, and thank you once again for this opportunity. I'm really grateful to be here presenting in front of you today.
Hi, Catherine. Thank you. That was really good. I'm sorry about that lack of sound in the middle and you disappearing. I don't know what happened there, but thankfully you came back. Hi. If anybody has got a question for Catherine, just you can type it into the box at the side, and we'll get to them in a minute. But I just found that so fascinating and really nice, sort of reassuring to read like statistics and see expert kind of proof, if you like, that this is not something that just happens accidentally, that we are, it feels like you're waging a war when you're trying to be alcohol free. It does actually feel like you're kind of going into battle with the society we live in, because it is just everywhere. And we were just talking before you started presenting about the sign that I saw in a restaurant earlier this evening. I just had to shout at the manager in a restaurant for writing on the sign, which I'm sure everybody would see things like this all over the place, but saying about the Wi-Fi that was available, and a hilarious little note under the Wi-Fi sign saying, but don't use the Wi-Fi, talk instead, eat more food and get more drunk. And this is in a family restaurant. Completely unnecessary, and it's those sorts of messages, and then that's just a really kind of a little one that's but the real strong marketing messages that you're talking about, the pinking of the alcohol industry, have been so massively effective, and it is an absolute wonder that anybody's got round to thinking, actually I might want to stop drinking in the face of all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what's really interesting is that the bar owner, who probably wrote that little sign, probably didn't have any idea that it was, in any way controversial for a family restaurant, because it's so normalised and it's almost expected when you go out. And I mean, it's awful. But he wouldn't have thought in a million years to write that, say, 60 years ago. It would have been so unacceptable.
Yeah. And I kind of questioned whether to say something or not, and I thought, he didn't really bank on Mrs. Militant Sober Easter turning up into his restaurant tonight, but I thought, no, I'm going to stick to my principles. I'm completely angered by this sign, and I will say something. And I think it's really important to challenge those cultural signs wherever we see them, because we should, not accept this as normal. It's not normal to be encouraging people to go out getting drunk all the time. So, and also the what you were saying as well about the beer in Japan, about with the collagen in, I found particularly awful. That we're trying to make a beer healthy and something that's going to make us look prettier, when we all know that.
Yeah. My favourite examples. No, I mean, I think especially in terms of trying to be alcohol free, we're coming up to the worst time of the year. I mean, everywhere you go, I was doing some DIY at the weekend and had the radio on, and every other advert was a major supermarket advertising how cheap its liquor was. They were all saying, it's right to get it's the festive period coming out. This means that you need to get everybody round for a drink. We're selling a litre of vodka and a litre of whiskey, all for £12 or whatever it was. And
yeah, it's inescapable.
Oh my goodness! No, we're in there. We're going to be that up.
Yeah. Well, we have just launched our Sober Easter. We've just started our Sober Easter's 31 challenge again. I don't know if you saw it last year, but we basically asked people to not drink through December and spend the money that they would have spent on alcohol, donate it to Rainbow Trust Children's Charity, which I think is a much better way to spend all that money than lining the pockets of all these huge multinational alcohol corporations that we're talking about. So we have had a few questions now popping up, so I'll just start with the first one, which is Trish. I loved hearing the statistics and the history of alcohol of women. I really needed to hear all of this, especially with the holiday this weekend, and everyone in my family are heavy drinkers. This has given me the strength to stay sober on Thursday, so thank you so much. Not so much a question, that one, but just a comment. But thanks, Trish. That's really
delighted.
Yeah, that's helped, and I think it really, really helped me. I have to say, when I understood the, the kind of forces at work behind how we sold alcohol, trying getting your head around that and realising that we are being manipulated, I think, is a really, really big help in terms of not drinking, because it kind of makes you feel a bit bloody-minded and kind of a bit determined to, say no.
Absolutely, and especially when we know that it's horrible multinational corporations.
Yeah, who wants to line big fat cat's pockets?
Yeah, exactly.
So, Fiona's asked, what does the Breast Cancer Council say about pinkwashing alcohol?
Well, it's very interesting that you say that. So the majority of pinkwashing is actually done or a lot of evidence has been found for it in the US. And I know that some academics have produced a research paper that was published just last month, actually, showing some documented evidence of pinkwashing. And I think that, and I'll happily share that paper as well, or a link to that paper with this presentation. And I think that the researchers who published that report are trying to engage in dialogue with the breast cancer charities in the United States. I think that it's a really tricky issue for them, because it's often there's often a division between fundraising teams and marketing teams within the cancer charities and kind of policy and health promotion teams. And I know big organisations, people don't necessarily talk to each other all the time, but also when it comes to sitting around the board table, people that bring the money in are often the ones that have the loudest voice. And I think that that's something that needs to be recognised, and I think it's something that needs to change. But I think the only way that it's ever really going to change is if there's a groundswell of public opinion change. And I think that public information and awareness is the first step for this, because as soon as the majority of people know that alcohol causes cancer, when you're in the supermarket and you see alcohol brand sponsoring a cancer, it's not going to sound right, and nobody's going to put up with it, and they know that there is a direct link. You wouldn't see a cancer charity sponsoring a cigarette brand, would you, or the vice versa, because everyone knows that would be wrong. So I think that we need to see more information given to the general public about the links between alcohol and cancer, because not many people know it.
Yeah, I think that's it, and I think presentations like this, articles in the media, items on the news, where people are actually informed, so that it becomes much more out there in terms of, in the sort of wider public circles about the links, so that we don't just blindly accept this information and the marketing that's out there, because most people don't know, and it's really alarming about how ignorant most people are to the link between breast cancer and alcohol. That's quite shocking, I think, that people just don't put those two things together like they do with cigarettes. And we were saying, again, back to my restaurant story earlier on, my daughter and me, she was laughing at me for telling off this man in the restaurant, but she said, you wouldn't see that sign with cigarettes, so a sign saying smoke up, everybody smoke up. It's just bizarre that we've kind of, we think it's so acceptable to encourage such a physically damaging habit as excessive drinking, but we do. So another point from Orla here, which is really, I think, really bang on, really interesting. We need to be much more proactive in finding ways for females to socialise and enjoy each other's company without the Prosecco culture. Cafes or chai houses open late at night with music, etc., perhaps. And that's another important point. There just isn't viable alternatives, really, to that. If you're going out with the girls, it's become the only option generally is to go out and drink loads of Prosecco. That's what everybody does. So if you don't drink, you can feel quite alienated, I think. So we do need to start being a bit more creative with what we offer at night.
So. Yeah, I would agree, but I think that if anybody's got the power to change this major culture, it's women. If you go back to those, those lovely temperance ladies saying that any lips that have touched liquor will not touch mine. Women, they were real drivers. They didn't even have the vote, and they were real drivers behind this. And I think that we can, women, talk about wanting to get something done, ask a busy woman to do it.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think as well, women are. There's a feeling of Yeah, there's a feeling of really like empowerment as well. I think, you know, if women come together and say, actually, no, I'm not just going to be manipulated like you know, like we have been for the last 15 years. I'm actually going to say no and do it my way and feel better for it, and be
Yeah.
a better parent and be a nicer person and look after myself and my health. You know, that's a really empowering thing to do, and it's easier, I have to say, when there's lots of people doing it together. So Soberistas is great for that, I think.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, and yeah, and all of the evidence shows that, you know, things with group support, peer support, are you know, 10 times more effective at helping meeting people's needs. So no, definitely, I think, yeah, I think this needs to be female driven.
Yeah, I agree. I've got one more point here from Trish from America, who says her 24-year-old daughter has just bought a bottle of pink vodka, and I will definitely be showing this to her if there is a recording. Yeah, there will be a recording, Trish, and we will edit out the gap in the middle where we lost Catherine for 5 minutes. So it will be a seamless webinar by the time it's on our webinars page. And I'm just reading a message here. Oh. Another question, sorry, just one more question. Let me just bring this up because I can't see it. Oh, it's Orla again. We have to offer alternatives, as beating by bleating is not really going to work. We have to offer women fun alternatives that make it seem normal not to drink while still enjoying each other's company. And I think that's the point as well. It's not just, I mean, it's absolutely the alcohol industry that are, you know, the bad guys in all of this. But I think as well, we have a responsibility to each other to start just promoting non-drinking, or you know, or not getting drunk as a normal thing to do. So it's about kind of having a conversation and being open and honest about not drinking, and in your own little way making that a more normal thing to do, so you don't just fall into the, you know, well, the assumption that everybody's out getting drunk, but to sort of say, no, I don't drink and I feel really good for not drinking, and be quite proud about that. Make that more normal. Challenge the norm that's become that Prosecco drinking woman.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it will be quite interesting to see the results of what's happened in Scotland since they lowered their drink drive limit last Christmas. So they lowered their drink driving limit, and the government advice was the limit is now so low that you can't even have one drink, and they actually advise against having several drinks the night before you're due to drive. Now, I know anecdotally people who've reported to me living in Scotland that they actually drink far less on a regular basis than they did before, because they know they can't even have one. So if they know they've got to go and pick the kids up from an activity, or if they're driving home from their book club, they won't have a drink at all. And they said that new piece of legislation has really impacted on their drinking habits, and they say it's far more normal now when you are in a pub to say, oh no, I'm driving. There's no, oh, just have one, because you know the peer pressure that you can get from drinking. Now everyone says, oh, okay, and they move on, and it's almost like we need something like that to then get to shift this normalisation.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true, and you know, as well, with just on that one drink or no drinks, as soon if you set the level for drink driving at kind of 2 drinks or 1 large drink, your willpower's gone. You know, it affects your judgment as soon as you have 1 drink. I've done it before as a drinker. Said I'm not gonna drive, but I'll just have 1, and then I've had 1, and I've thought, oh, sod it, I might as well have 3, and then I'll drive, and you know, my judgment's gone. Whereas if you don't drink at all, you are. You know, it's just such an easier option. And why would you kind of want to have 1 drink anyway when you're not really going to get any hit off it? So you might as well just not drink. But it does need to come from the government, and I think that's the important thing. We need to get those same public health messages from the government that we've had in relation to cigarettes. Well, one more comment. Hang on, a couple more. Trish has asked, does Catherine have a PDF of the research to show about alcohol causing cancer, so we can print it and give it to loved ones to read?
So yes, we've got a report on alcohol and cancer that was produced by the Alcohol Health Alliance UK, and it's actually on our website, which is www.ias.org.uk. or you can Google the Institute of Alcohol Studies, and you'll find it's on our website.
Right, great, okay, and we might be able to get some of the sort of bullet points from you about from those statistics as well, and put them on Sober Easters if that's all right.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
Just acts as a good kind of motivator, I think, if people can see it in black and white. And Orla has just said she's feeling quite fired up by challenging the norm. She's in Scotland, and it has stopped the liquid lunches most definitely.
Oh, yeah. See,
Scotland are really taking the lead on alcohol, aren't they? So much more than we are in England.
I know, it's quite embarrassing being down here, actually.
Yeah. But it's just David Cameron and all his champagne quaffing mates, really, I think. That we've got to
yeah. I couldn't comment.
We'll get to work, as the Sober Easter's massive. I think we just need to apply some pressure.
I think you need to go and see David, Lucy.
Yeah, I think so. It's due, overdue. Right, well that's all the questions, and it is 9 o'clock, and I know you've got a really bad cold and you've struggled.
I'm sorry about that.
So I'll let you go, but thanks ever such a lot, Catherine. That was so informative and really motivational, and it will be on our webinars page in the next day or two on the website, without the gap in the middle for anybody who wants to watch it again. All right, so thanks everybody for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Catherine. Bye.
Bye.